Oh hey, the nation of Fontaine is out. Let me see what we've got here. Okay, new art conquests, brand new area to explore, that checks out, new characters, very cool, very cool. Alright, the new swimming mechanic, it looks nice, let me try it. Wait, this is way more fun than I expected. Wait, why the hell am I getting one-shot by stingrays? Why are fish harder than floor 12 of the Spiral Abyss? No wonder both Morax and Boris said that they hate the creatures of the depths. Oh, what do we have here? More good boys that we cannot bet? Oh, what do we have here? Melazines? You know what? I want to talk about the Melazines for a second because they are absolutely adorable. I never expected to like them this much, but they are so cute, you guys. I love them so much. I mean, just look at them. They are small and innocent and they like to help others. I did not think that whoever could make a species cuter than the Pari, but somehow these little ladies won me over. I really like the Melazines, and honestly, I enjoyed playing the world quests with them simply because of how pure-hearted they are. Okay. I'm going to have to be honest with you guys. In reality, things are nowhere near what they appear to be on the surface. And these adorable little mademoiselles are not your typical cute species like the Bakidanuki, the Aranara, or even the Pari. On the surface, nothing is wrong, I agree with that. And as I said before, I absolutely love the Melazines. That being said, once you start digging deep into their lore, you'll realize that there are some really sinister undertones to the things they say. An excellent example of this is that one hidden quest with Vernata, Puka, and Canotilla, where they liken the decapitated fish heads on a pie to a happy choir singing and praising God. Need I say more? Now, this video will effectively function as a follow-up to my previous video about the 2 missing elements in Genshin Impact, meaning that most of the information discussed there will be extremely relevant to what I'm going to talk about here because the lore added with Fontaine directly confirmed a number of propositions I made in that video and also presents a lot of evidence that supports a few theories I had in mind. So to start things off, I'm going to be telling you a very important story that will set the tone for the rest of this video. Inside the fell dragon Elynas, we meet a Melazine called Canotilla, who mentions to Paimon that she resembles a rainbow balloon whose strings stretch beyond the sky itself. Canotilla then says that, on the contrary, the traveler is a terrible monster that will devour the entire world in a single bite. You see, Genshin Impact's core universe is inspired by a flash game called The Legend of Saha from 2010, made by miHoYo's co-founder and CEO, Sai-Hao Yu. This was before he and Liu Wei founded the company itself. Legend of Saha takes place in a fictional land of Nalan, that would be Genshin Impact's Natlan, and Mount Sumuro, which is also a sacred Buddhist mountain. The main character of the story is called Mise Nanatsuki. This is the progenitor of all Hoyoverse, and their most important characters are either directly inspired by her or referencing her in some way. Such characters include Aether, Lumine, Murata, Mark 7th, Kiana, and Chi-Chi. The story of the Legend of Saha goes as follows. Mise Nanatsuki wakes up missing her memories, which were scattered across the entire world along with her soul fragments. She then embarks on a quest to retrieve her memories and over time remembers that she is from the nation of Nalan, which is about to be destroyed by an army of a king from an opposing nation. Mise Nanatsuki decides to go to the heavenly realm to ask the gods to save her people from the wicked army of their enemies. However, when Nanatsuki reaches the end of her journey, she finds out that the city of the gods is empty, and there is nothing there more than an illusion, while the real heavenly realm rests beyond the sky itself. Nanatsuki sacrifices herself then to meet the gods and asks them to save Nalan. But they mock her and refuse, allowing the country to be destroyed by their enemies. The reason the gods do this is that they were once also humans, and the way they harness their power is by granting the wishes of the people. And because the gods' source of power is intrinsically linked to the wishes of their worshippers, they are susceptible to the temptations of sin and mortal desires. And they stand to gain more from granting the wishes of the army and allowing the genocide of Nalan than granting the wish of a single lonely girl. Nana is then reborn in Mount Sumuru. This time realizing what happened, she embarks on a different mission to seek revenge on the gods. But every time Nana fails to kill them and then dies and gets reborn again on Mount Sumuru, over and over and over again in an endless pagoda. Finally, when Nana is closest to achieving her goal, she discovers a horrifying reality. The gods had bound themselves to the world, meaning that for her to defeat them, she would have to kill every single living soul. At this point in the game, the player can choose to either give up entirely or proceed and try to kill the gods anyway. In both cases, Nana is killed and eventually gets reincarnated once again on Mount Sumeru, forever fated to repeat her eternal cycle. After hearing what you just heard from me, does this story of the Legend of Saha remind you of anything in particular? Anyway, if you are interested in further readings on the topic, a Reddit thread by Babao Tree lists several extremely interesting details about the Legend of Saha and its connections to other Hoyoverse games. I will hopefully remember to leave a link in the description. I will ask you to keep in mind what I told you regarding the Legend of Saha. I'll get back to it when the latter half of this video comes and I discuss how Dottore will end the story of Genshin Impact. But for now, we are going to shift our attention to the Fontaine Narzissenkreuz Institute, which is inspired by the Greek mythological story of Narcissus and Echo. The reason I can bring you this type of theory this fast is because, well, I'm the only idiot who is stupid enough to the point where the first thing I did when I got to Fontaine was locate all of the World Quest NPCs and then proceed to speedrun their quests. Everyone is on the highway of the Archon Quest having fun, meanwhile I'm the one moron driving through the jungle to avoid traffic. By the time this video comes out, I have not even started the Fontaine Archon Quest yet. And trust me when I tell you this. By the time I am done, whenever you hear Zhongli saying, "I will have order," yeah, you will never ever hear that the same way again. Our story starts following the destruction of Gurabad in Sumeru. North of Gurabad in the high waters, a god descended upon the uncivilized people of those times. His name was Remus, and he taught the people how to build large structures, weapons, complex mathematics, and a vast amount of art and music, amongst many things. Over time, Remus would lead his people on an enormous conquest across the lands, creating at the time what was the greatest empire in the world, Remuria, and even subdued the Hydro Dragon sovereign himself. Remus decided to elect 4 mighty humans known as the Harmos, and shared his divine gift with them. And that act of reckless generosity from Remus angered the heavens, so the god of fate, whoever it may be, devised a plot to turn Remus and his 4 Harmos against one another, and in the end, Remuria was destroyed by conflict and strife, and its rulers were devoured by the abyss. Not long after, Igeria, the first Hydro Archon, united the scattered people of Remuria and established the court of Fontaine. We are not done with Remus. I will get back to him later, trust me on this. But for now, we will fast forward to approximately 510 years prior to the current events of the game. Here, I want to introduce you to a number of extremely important characters. The first is Basile Elton, an admiral of the Fontaine Armada, along with her friend Alain Guillotin, a Maréchaussée hunter. During their time, there was a lot of political turmoil in Fontaine, and the court deemed that the Fleuve Cendre must be purged from criminals. This brings us to Eduardo Baker, a vigilante who resisted and survived the purge. He was later exiled into the desert to die, but was saved by his men and moved to Poussin, where he met with Renault de Petrichor, the mayor of Petrichor, and formed a resistance against the court of Fontaine. Parsifal the Great, we don't actually know what her real name is, who was a magician and a criminal, dealt a decisive loss at the hands of Alain Guillotin, decided to join the resistance. Eduardo Baker had a son, his name was Jacob Baker. The young boy became really good friends with Renault's own son, Rene de Petrichor. Now, out of all the names I've mentioned so far, remember Rene, he's very important. The court of Fontaine heard news of the brewing revolution and decided to send their elite forces into Poussin to crush the rebels once and for all. These forces were spearheaded by none other than Parsifal's nemesis, Emmanuel Guillotin. Carl Ingold, a Fontainian reporter, was there at the time and took pictures and recordings of the Poussin before the ensuing battle. The siege of Poussin saw the entire town burn to ash. All of its residents were rounded up, including women and children, and slaughtered without mercy. These events were so horrific that Emmanuel Guillotin retired immediately following the siege and descended into alcoholism and depression. Carl Ingold managed to save the 2 boys, Rene and Jacob, and took them to the Narzissenkreuz Institute, led by an Oceanid and her friend Basile Elton, which specialized in raising orphans and the children of criminals. There, Rene de Petrichor and Jacob Baker would become acquainted with Alain and his little sister Marianne, along with their dog Seymour. The Narzissenkreuz Institute quickly realized that Alain and Rene were geniuses who possessed mental capacities on par with Fontaine's greatest minds, and thus they were granted special privileges which they extended to Marianne and Jacob. But peace would not last for long. As the kingdom of Khaenri'ah fell, monsters from the abyss rose to the surface and brought calamity to the land. Egeria and Rukkhadevata left their posts in Fontaine and Sumeru to quell the disaster crawling from the Tunigi Hollow. A great sinner unleashed alien beasts that invaded Teyvat and tore the very fabric of reality. One such beast was the fell dragon Elynas, whose mere existence polluted the waters of Fontaine and killed an untold number of people. And here, we need to stop for a moment and talk about Rhinedottir and Elynas. You see, guys, we have a problem here. We know that Rhinedottir made Durin, and while Durin was a very powerful and dangerous dragon, it was fine. I can honestly let him slide and call it a mistake, like whatever. But Elynas? You see, guys, he was big. Really big. You know what? He was far too big. But I'm going to try and rationalize the thought process of Rhinedottir here. So I will throw a proposition in this video and expand on it at a different time. Rhinedottir, to some capacity, was trying to emulate Zhongli. Basically, she was a copycat. We know that Rhinedottir worked on the Primordial Human Project in Khaenri'ah, and Alice calls her a flower that is not of this world. We know that her title was Gold. Here, Rhinedottir's title references Citrinitas, a stage of alchemy symbolized by the sun. Now we know that Mora, the currency of Teyvat, is made of gold, and is named after Morax, who is Zhongli, and Zhongli's sixth constellation, by the way, the constellations are made up of stars, is called Chrysos, which is the Greek spirit of gold. And when it comes to the sun illusion, well, I'm gonna let Ajdaha tell you.
A star appears within the wild. A sun ascends as bright as jade.
And since we're on the topic of Ajdaha, Rhinedottir has a weird obsession with dragons. Elynas recounts Rhinedottir hearing his cries and pulling him out of the cosmic darkness and giving him a body and a name, which is oddly similar to what Morax did with Ajdaha when he heard his voice, lifted him from the ground to the surface, and gave him eyes to see the world. And no, the correlations do not end here. Rhinedottir's creations, Alfisol, Cretaceous, and Humus, are all named after geological terms or types of soil. And Morax, as you know, is the god of Geo, which means that extends his dominion to both rocks and the soil. And to put the cherry on top, Rhinedottir's son Albedo has a constitution compatible with the element of Geo, hence why he has a Geo vision. Listen, I'm nowhere near done with Zhongli, I'll get back to him later, but we first need to finish the story of the Narzissenkreuz Institute. So, when Elynas reached Fontaine, Admiral Basil Elton and the Oceanic director of the Narzissenkreuz Institute decided to bring the fight to the Fell Dragon. Before departing, Basil entrusted the children of the Institute to her two best friends, Alain Guillotin and Carl Ingold. Thus, Emmanuel adopted Alain and Marianne, while Carl adopted Jacob and Rene went with them. As Basil and the Oceanid went to their death, Carl took Rene and Jacob and they went on a scientific expedition to the Volkasha Oasis where the Hydro Archon Egeria had recently passed away. There, they explored the recent exposed remnants of the Khaenri'ah Azosite factory, and Rene made several discoveries that are extremely important. First, he noticed that the power of the Gvarena, which were spirits gifted to Rukkhadevata by the goddess of flowers, more on her later, possessed a will of their own and had different properties from that of the conventional seven elements of the gods. In fact, Rene states that the Gvarena had much more in common with the abyss than it did with the elements, and that is incredibly important. Because going back to my previous video, we already established that the Primordial One likely has connections with the Abyss, and that was evidenced by the fact that the Abyss is inspired by Honkai Impact's Sea of Quanta, which in Honkai has its own will and seeks to devour the imaginary tree. And Honkai's imaginary force is likely the inspiration behind the power of the Primordial One, Ether, and Lumine. Interestingly enough, Rene also states that the power of the Abyss has its own will, and that makes me wonder if Rhinedottir was extracting souls from the will of the Abyss and giving them physical bodies within the mortal realm. We'll get back to this idea, but first, Rene points out that the composition of both his and Jacob's bodies was very much akin to that of the Sacred Lotus. Here, he's likely referring to the Gaukerena lotus that Rukkhadevata made from the consciousness of Egeria. However, he did not observe for that to be the case with Carl, indicating that Rene and Jacob were special. Due to the recent battles that took place at the location, an enormous quantity of elemental and abyssal energies filled the environment, and an unspecified accident caused Jacob's health to deteriorate to the point of fatality. Rene then imbues Jacob with the the will of the abyss using unspecified methods, which revives Jacob and turns him into an iniquitous Baptist, no longer needing to eat food to obtain energy. Soon, Rene and Jacob discover the old Khaenri'ah text that hosts a mathematical law known as the world formula that describes the cyclical nature of birth and destruction in Teyvat. And through that formula, Rene sees visions of the dark future where the abyss will engulf the world, but this time it would never be reborn again, and not even mint or a sweet flower would grow. Terrified by his prophecy, Rene and Jacob immediately start to look into a way to circumvent the eventual end of the world. Meanwhile, back in Fontaine, Alain and Marianne join the Maréchaussée Phantom, after which Alain leaves the Phantom to join the Institute of Natural Philosophy, where he and his assistant Carter conduct heavy research into technology of King Deshret, while Marianne would often visit them and help them out. Here, I want to take a moment to talk about Marianne because I won't have much opportunity to discuss her later. Carter describes the young Anne as a fabulous child, adorable and loved by all, and got along with everyone. She was incredibly emotionally intelligent and sensitive and had a strong moral compass and would often scold Carter and Alain for not taking care of themselves in their research. All in all, Marianne was a kind soul in this world, and her brother Alain loved her dearly. In fact, almost everything he did was for her sake, of giving her a better world to live in. Now, back to Alain's research on Deshret's technology, specifically the energy source of the primal constructs, which Alain labels as the prime energy. Right now, we are in the most important part of this video, so pay attention. You see, these constructs that Alain spent a great deal on are weird because they were built by King Deshret, who we know could control the 7 elements. Yet despite that, the primal constructs are not powered by, nor do they use any of the 7 elements. So the question becomes, what exactly is this weird blue energy that powers them? Well, according to the damaged prisms you obtain from defeating such machines, the primal constructs operate on the exact same principles as the field tillers from Khaenri'ah. However, that introduces a new problem. Khaenri'ah field tillers are powered by azosite, which is raw elemental energy extracted directly from the ley lines and has a golden color. And Rene makes it clear that azosite has no will of its own, which he finds disappointing. So how exactly would that be the same? Well, let's continue. You'll see. At one point, when Carter was helping Alain, he accidentally knocked over one of the primal constructs, causing it to activate. According to Carter, Alain then proceeds to tame the primal construct and neutralize it. Now, even Carter himself said that tame should not be the right word to use here because machines are not living beings and operate on orders. However, Carter later states that it genuinely felt like Alain was taming the construct and remarks on the technological gulf between Fontaine at the time and King Deshret's civilization. And that incident is the reason you are watching this video right now, because it got me thinking about Alain's research into King Deshret's technology and what made it so special. And then it hit me. It's the energy source. And those primal constructs operate on this weird blue energy. So let's break it down systematically. Alain Guillotin calls it prime energy, meaning that he suspects it to be some kind of primordial force. But at the same time, it cannot be either the forces of the abyss or Celestia, chaos or order, quantum or imaginary, whatever you want to call them. Because we have established before, those do not belong to the human realm and don't follow the same rules as the 7 elements. However, we know that King Deshret was known as the god of war and order and the master of the 7 elements. This highly implies that he possessed the same type of power as Ether Lumine in the primordial one. For the sake of clarity, I'm just going to call it force of order for now. So, what kind of energy did he use to power these primal constructs? Well, it's certainly the exact same type of energy he used in the Great Hall of Truths, which powers the entirety of his mausoleum. And it's the exact same type of energy we see overflowing from the various chess pieces on King Deshret's chessboard. But it is not just that. The mysterious blue energy can be found all across Deshret's technology. It legitimately powered his entire civilization. The game officially calls this energy primal light. And we know that light is a form of electromagnetic waves that transmit energy. So Alain calling them prime energy checks out. But still, what are they exactly? Well, when Rene and Jacob returned from the desert, Alain decided to enroll them in the Institute of Natural Philosophy alongside him. Later on, Alain and Marianne learned the twisted nature of Rene's research into the abyss, but reluctantly agreed to turn a blind eye to it for a while. So, I kept looking into it, and then I remembered these things. The primal embers you find in the desert, looking at these primal embers should remind you of something, because you have seen them before many times. That's right. They have the exact same appearance as the embers of fire in Dragonspine and the embers of life in the rainforests of Sumeru. And guess what happens when you move these primal embers into a primal torch in Deshret's ruins? It aligns itself with the pyro element and becomes an ember of fire. And the moment I saw this, the realization hit me. Guys, I think I know exactly what Alain Guillotin was trying to do with Deshret's technology. After Rene returned, both he and Alain began researching the rune grader. And this was not any rune grader, it's an anomalous mortal rune grader that can use leyline energy to repair itself indefinitely, similar to how Deshret's constructs can repair themselves when damaged. And in that same room, you can find this device. This is a Persina spike, created by a Sumerian scholar who goes by the same name in order to disrupt the flow of leyline energies. And these Persina spikes were used in a limited time event from patch 2.2 called Shadow of the Ancients on Surumi Island to stop the anomalous model rune grader from absorbing leyline energy and repairing itself. And in that same event, the item we use to search for our targets is called Ayesha's Chaos Prospector. Once again, Chaos is the Abyss. And this brings me to the final thing that Alain was researching at the Institute of Natural Philosophy, the Numan Usia blocks and their annihilation reaction. You see, in Fontaine, there are these devices called Numusia relays which can exist in 3 different states: Usia, Balanced, and Numa. Now, we have previously established that Usia energy corresponds to quantum or chaos, while Numa energy corresponds to order or imaginary. And the words Numa and Usia are Greek words. On one hand, Numa means spirit, soul, or creativity. This is awfully similar to my proposition of the imaginary, while Usia means essence, reality, or substance, which again, if you saw my previous video about quantum mechanics in Genshin, this is awfully similar to the concept of quantum within the Hoyoverse. When Usia and Numa come in contact, they annihilate one another, exactly like how the abyssal energy from the son of Apausha and the Kvarena energy from the Gaukrena that Rukadevata made annihilate one another. However, what Alain Guillotin found was that if this annihilation reaction takes place within a controlled environment, the energy produced could be harnessed and used to power machinery. And guess what this balanced energy looks like? Suddenly, it all makes sense. These 3 seemingly unrelated subjects of research that Alain studied were all the exact same thing. What Alain was doing when he was looking into Deshret's technology and the rune graders, he was trying to replicate the power source. And this mysterious blue energy that powered Deshret's civilization is unaligned elemental energy, meaning that it is indeed elemental energy. However, it does not take the properties of the 7 elements until it enters an object with a specific constitution or an environment conducive to one or more of the 7 elements, where it adjusts its shape and takes the form of that element. And this becomes apparent once I direct your attention back to the primal embers and how they modify themselves into different elemental embers depending on the alignment of whatever comes in contact with them or consumes them. This concept of neutral energy is nothing alien to Genshin Impact. At the end of the day, it has existed since the game came out through many enemies who drop such type of energy and weapons like the Favonius series that can generate such neutral energy. And this is very important because this answers one of the most fundamental questions in the game: how visions operate in Teyvat. The reason vision wielders are able to resist leyline disorders, resist abyssal corruption, and use their elements in various different environments is because what visions do is they take primal unaligned elemental energy flowing in the ley lines and convert it into elemental energy that is aligned with the constitution of the vision wielder. And because ley lines are everywhere in Teyvat, you do not need to be around a water body to use a hydrovision or near a source of heat to use a pyrovision. And the Traveler is the perfect demonstration of this because their body itself is aligned with the ley lines. And suddenly, this quote from Zhongli carries a lot more meaning.
I see. Using a vision harnesses elements. As far as the common folk are concerned, this is no small feat. So, back then, they were aware of this as they stood beside me.
That takes me back to the name of this type of energy, Primal Light. It reminds me of the 3rd realm of Teyvat, the Light Realm, also known as the Elemental Realm. It is the realm of the dragons and bishops, and guess who is a dragon that can absorb elemental energy from the ley lines directly? That's right, Ajdaha, who once again Zhongli found at the bottom of the earth. And the existence of this primal energy makes a lot of sense because within the light realm, there were 7 dragon sovereigns, each corresponding to one of the 7 elements, but there was also a dragon king, Nebulon, who most likely corresponds to this primal light. But if primal light is pure unaligned elemental energy, wouldn't that just make it exactly like azocite? Well, no, it wouldn't. Let me tell you why. You see, there is something in Teyvat known as the Primordial Sea, and it is basically waters from which all life originated. When Remus, the god of the Remurian Empire, first descended on Teyvat, Celestia handed him a goblet which Remus used to refine the waters of the Primordial Sea into golden ichor. I'm willing to bet this entire video that these primordial waters are the exact same type of water we find within the inverted city in the chasm with Dainsleif. And it is refining it that produces this golden elemental energy. But refining it from what exactly? That's the question. Well, I'm glad you asked. Or maybe you didn't, I don't know, but let's just pretend you did. So, Remus had the divine ability to split the soul from the body, and Remurians would often split mortal souls and put them into golems. Now, Igeria once had a prophecy that the Primordial Sea would flood the land and dissolve the people of Fontaine into it, reabsorbing their souls. For those of you who watched my previous video, this should be a huge callback to the Sea of Quanta reabsorbing the worlds from the imaginary tree. And if you remember who created the great songs of the Varena, it was the goddess of flowers, who herself was a Seelie. And guess what color the Seelies take when they are in their spirit form? And even if you use elemental sight on them, the exact same thing is maintained. But what is even crazier is that the Seelies, just like the Primal Embers, can adapt and align themselves with various elements if needed, as we can see from the Dendro Seelies, the Electro Seelies, the Pyro Seelies, and even the Lumen Seelies in the Chasm. And remember the Persena spikes I talked about earlier? Aside from patch 2.2, they show up in an event in patch 2.7 in the Chasm, where we use them to defeat the abyssal monsters around the oozing concentrations. And guess what else Rene and Jacob were researching when they got back to Fontaine? Dark mud from the abyss, which is abyssal filth by the celestial nail. And we use these lumen stones in order to clear the dark mud. And this is perfect because the celestial nail showcases exactly what we observe from the annihilation reaction of Numa and Usia, once again producing primal light in the process. And if you think we are done, oh no, we are just getting started. Because you know what else has exact same colors as the Seelies and is also a spirit? The lingering ghosts of the denizens of Tsurumi Island. And the person who takes these ghosts away, the boatman, has a number of extremely interesting things to say. At first, before you find the people, he says, the near side of the river, hey, the cypress-painted silver hoy, the silver wormwood on the ground, the silver stones lie all around. And then he proceeds to talk about his lady, who owns a golden mansion on the moon. I think it is safe to assume that the boatman is talking about the lunar palace here, but I'm not certain of who his lady's identity is. And once we guide the souls back, the boatman then says, the far side of the river, hey, the golden oak is yonder hoy, the golden wormwood on the ground, the golden stones lie all around. Okay, there is a lot to say here, but right now I'm talking about ley lines, so I'll stick to the topic and leave the rest for a different video. First off, everyone knows that the silver corresponds to the moon, while gold, as we discussed earlier in this video, Zhongli, corresponds to the sun. Now, the Aranara liken Paimon to the moon and Ether to the sun, and as we know, the Traveler's original power is a golden force very similar to Numa, and the Traveler in Genshin Impact is also aligned with Numa, if you switch to the Hydro Traveler that is, which is an undisputable confirmation. One conclusion amongst many of what the boatman is saying, and I'm going to have to explain this calmly because it's getting complicated at this point, is him talking about the ley lines around Tsurumi Island. When the ghosts of the people are lingering on the island, the ley lines are full of blue primal light, hence silver cypress tree. But when you bring the lost souls back to the boatman, the ley lines take on the golden hue, hence the golden oak. What I'm trying to say is that blue primal light has the capacity to contain within it souls and memories which are transmitted as data through the ley lines, and when we enter Irminsul, which is essentially the motherboard and main data hub of Teyvat, we find that it is a giant tree made out of primal light. Right before we enter the Great Hall of Truths in Deshret's mausoleum, remember that we pass through a location known as the Duat Hall. And Duat is the ancient Egyptian realm of the dead, where the dead and their souls go for their judgment. And if you look down into it, you will notice a sea of primal light and these eerie blue trails reaching out. And if you look at the entrance of the Duat Hall, guess what is conveniently placed right there? a blue Seelie. One final interesting mechanism from Deshret civilization is the manifestation mechanism. To activate this device, you need to pass on an energy signal of primal light known as the signal spirit. Do you now see the significance of Remus's ability to split the souls of the living from their bodies? Going back to my point about the Traveler being the sun and Paimon being the moon. And Kanomia is another location where you can see this relationship materialized, because the Sun Chariot has two different states. The Ever Knight representing the moon, and the White Knight representing the sun. And during the Three Realms Gateway offering event in patch 2.6, the Dainichi Mikoshi takes the form of a giant golden tree. Opening chests there grants you Light Realm sigils, instead of your usual elemental sigils. Now, for those of you who know, this duality between silver and gold is very much reminiscent of how Demeter covers the world in ice when Hades, the god of the dead, snatches Persephone and then brings back spring when she meets her daughter again in the field of Narcissus. Soon after Jacob and Rene return to work with Alain Guillotin, they meet with his assistant Carter. One thing that I neglected to mention about Carter earlier is that following the corruption of the waters of Fontaine by Elynas, Carter became very sick, to a degree detrimental to his life. So Rene suggests that they perform the exact same procedure they did on Jacob to Carter, which the latter agrees to do. However, unlike Jacob, the procedure fails miserably with Carter, and the poor man's body contorts and mutates into a horrific monstrosity. The man suffers for days as the monstrous cries from his disfigured throat echo in Jacob's head. No longer the cries of a human, yet ones filled with suffering. To calm Jacob down, Rene would constantly try to locate Carter's throat wherever it now was, cut it open, and then remove his vocal cords. But no matter how many times Rene performed the bloody deed, Carter's throat would heal and his screeching screams would continue to echo. In the end, Alain and Marianne discover what Rene and Jacob had done to Carter and instantly cut all ties with them, severing their lifelong friendship. Alain would depart to join his sister once again in the Maréchaussée Phantom, while Rene would go on to establish a cult known as the Narzissenkreuz Ordo, dedicated to stopping the end of the world. Eventually, after researching the corpse of Elynas, where Jacob consumes some of Elynas' blood, obtaining additional power, Rene and Jacob realize that there is no stopping the apocalypse, and that the only way forward would be to transform all of humanity into neo-humans such as Jacob, who could survive the end of the world and rebuild society from scratch. At some point in time, Rene found a divine sword that can split the soul from the body, and using that blade and presumably Elynas' blood, Rene absorbs the other members of the Narzissenkreuz Ordo into himself, becoming a superhuman hive mind and gradually losing his own identity in the process. Eventually, Emmanuel Guillotin and Marianne Guillotin of the Maréchaussée Phantom, along with an army of mechanized animals created by Alain Guillotin, one of whom is Seymour, a mecha dog made in honor of their previous hound, catch up to the Narzissenkreuz Ordo, and a great battle takes place inside Elynas, leading to a massive explosion that sends thousands of shards from Alain's mechanical animals piercing through Elynas' internal organs. When the dust settles, everyone is killed, and only Jacob, Alain, and whatever creature Rene had become remains standing. The creature once known as Rene confronts Alain, asking him to join the Ordo, but to no one's surprise, Alain declined, leaving Rene and Jacob with his final parting words: "It seems that there is no going back." From the wounds of Elynas, tiny creatures would emerge. They would be known as the Melazines, each being born with mysterious tokens as proof of their life. There are several interesting things to talk about here. I will start with the Melazines, because despite being born from Elynas, the Melazines do not harm or corrupt the land around them, and it is perfectly safe for humans to exist around them. I think that has to do with the tokens they are born with. You see, these tokens are likely shards from the mechanical animals Alain Guillotin created. And we know that Alain's creations are based on King Deshret's technology, which uses primal light as its energy source. Now, remember the whole info dump I threw earlier about leyline energy potentially housing souls? Well, I suspect that the Melazines were born from that energy after coming into contact with Elynas' flesh and neutralizing its abyssal filth. This theory of mine is also hinted at in-game when the Melazine Mamir gives her token to Seymour, the same mecha dog that Alain made for her sister Marianne. Another thing that is interesting is that when we enter into Rene's vision of the Abyss, we find a note implying that there are two ways to reach that location. One is through the Book of Revealing, which is what we do, and the other is through the Looking Glass, which is ironic because the area where the note is found is a copy of the Library library of Enkanomia, the same library where we discover a magical mirror and go through that mirror to transport us to another copy of the library where before Sun and Moon, the same book whose contents caused Celestia to execute Orobashi can be found. Now, let us quickly talk about the sword Rene uses to dissolve and merge the people's souls into one. In the quest, the Narzissenkreuz Adventure, which is a reference to two fairy tales by Charles Darcin, those being Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, we go on an adventure with a small Oceanid named An, and we meet a group of talking animals, each representing a member of the Institute of Natural Philosophy, on a quest to save Princess Laris from the evil dragon Narcissus. Later on, we reach a cyclical labyrinth in search of the Holy Blade of the Narzissenkreuz, where we also find a fake sword called the Jabberwocky's Holy Sword, which is a reference to the Vorpal blade that Alice uses to slice off the draconic Jabberwocky's neck. And funny enough, after leaving the Narzissenkreuz Institute, Jabberwocky's sword disappears from our inventory. Now, when it comes to the Holy Blade of Narzissenkreuz, there's likely a reference to the divine sword that Rene uses to merge the souls of the Ordo into himself, and the weapon is likely an artifact of ancient Lemuria, since their god Remus could split the souls. You know what, since we are on the topic of Remus, let me mention this. In the fairy tale of Alice Through the Looking Glass, Alice finds herself in a world where everything is reversed. Genshin Impact, to an extent, is a mirror world of our own. You see, all the gods are named after demons. Going through the spiral abyss leads you to the stars, and Remus shouldn't exist. After all, in the real Roman myth, when the brothers Remus and Romulus clash, it is Romulus who kills Remus and forms the Roman Empire. But in Genshin, we have Remus and the Lemurian Empire. But that is a topic for another time. That being said, these whole hive mind shenanigans that Rene does should remind you of El Haytham's story quest, where the academia graduate named Siraj attempts to merge minds of the people into one hive mind. This is exactly what King Deshret did with his own people in the Golden Slumber, where a million minds merged into one. This correlation between Rene and Jacob finding the Conrian world formula and using it to predict the end of Teyvat, along with Remus seeking to end the 7-day cycle of the world and Deshret seeking to remove the cycle of the 7 sage monks, is very interesting. And make no mistake, this blue unaligned energy can be found across several locations in Teyvat. Enkanomia is full of them. The teleportation points, the mysterious statues in Watatsumi Island, which could be a reference to the primordial sea in the stories of Igeria and Remus. As we established earlier, Amun's technology utilized primal light as its energy source, which is unaligned elemental energy from the ley lines. When you complete a domain in Genshin Impact and go to claim your rewards, you feed the golden ley line tree with resin, which comes in the shape of a moon. And we already established how big the connections between the sun and moon are to the travelers in Paimon and the primal energy of Genshin Impact. And when the tree absorbs the resin, it momentarily turns blue in color because it is refining the memories and turning them into items that you can pick up. And when the tree turns blue, well, if you pay attention, you will notice that it releases blue cubes. The exact same cubes that you can find on Celestia's divine nail, which is actively working in the chasm to cleanse abyssal power. And remember that the other nail we see in Vindagnir does not emit primal light to the same extent as the one in the chasm, since Vindagnir does not suffer as much abyssal corruption, because again, what is happening in the chasm is essentially a pneumausia annihilation reaction that is producing primal light in the form of these cubes, just like how Deshret's technology could form primal light into polyhedrons that you can interact with in Sumeru. And I know for a fact, whenever you first saw these cubes of primal light emitting from the nail in the chasm, the first thought that came to your mind was the sustainer of heavenly principles. With that being said, there is one more god whose power manifests as a cube. Take a look at the statues of the 7. Every single one of the archons holds a sphere representing their dominion over their respective elements, all except Morax, who holds a cube. Now, I get it. You could argue that this is just because Geo is stone and stone is hard, and yeah, you can just call it that. But hold on to this thought for a moment. We'll get back to it. In my previous video, I talked about how the power of the Primordial One that shaped Teyvat from the light realm of the dragons is inspired by Honkai Impact's imaginary force, which comes from the imaginary tree that absorbs the Sea of Quanta and converts it into tangible matter in the physical realm, converting chaos into order. We also established previously that Genshin's domains and by extension realms of consciousness are created using imaginary force, as we have seen in Beelzebul's story quest. Now, remember the Siren Teapot quest that we did with Yanfei and Ping to obtain the Teapot realm? Well, when we do that quest, Tubby makes it very clear to us that the Teapot Realm is nothing more than a subspace that the Adepti created, and most Adepti can make such subspaces. Cloud Retainer has one, Guizhong made one to house her research into Conrian technology. Tubby even says that these spaces can be manipulated and transformed using the minds of the people inside them. And one translation of the Greek pneuma, as I said earlier, is creative force. Now, if that does not scream imaginary force to you, then I do not know know what will. Finally, guess who taught the Adepti how to create these subspaces? It was Zhongli! Going back to the Teapot quest, Ping tells us that the Adepti's ability to form such subspaces is but a crude imitation of the true power of the Lord of Geo, who can reshape entire mountains and carve valleys in the physical realm. Alright, it's time to put the nail in the coffin right now. During the Archon Quest Perilous Trial, we venture deep into the chasm along with Shao, Yelan, Yanfei in search of a device that can alter the space known as the Fantastic Compass, created by a currently unknown individual who passed it down by the Adepti and humans until it reached the hands of Yelan's ancestor. Now, while I want to take this opportunity to point out that the Fantastic Compass radiates the same type of energy as the technologies of King Deshret and Alain Guillotin, that is not the point I'm trying to convey here. You see, after discovering the Fantastic Compass is just an illusion and that the subspaces they are in lies on the border between the Void Realm and the physical realm, the group attempts to escape until the Abyss catches up to them, at which point Shao realizes that the only way for his friends to survive would be for him to sacrifice himself and use the remainder of his power to lift them up to the surface, which he does and then seemingly falls to his death, devoured by the Abyss, until Zhongli pulls off one of the most impressive feats of strength that we have witnessed in the game so far and lifts Shao back up to the surface. And okay, no, we need to take a moment and think about just how incredible of a feat this was. We have Shao, one of the strongest characters in the story by virtue of being one of the 5 Yaksha. And along him, we have Traveler, Yelan, and Yanfei, all extremely capable individuals by their own rights. And it took them multiple hours of tireless effort while almost getting wiped and having to sacrifice one of their own just to get out of the Abyss subspace. And here you have Zhongli standing on a cliff on the surface of the chasm, who reached out through the surface, into the mines, through the abyssal corruption, into the divine nail, and then from there down into the corrupted subspace, which is basically a separate domain altogether, and pulled Shao from the abyss back to the surface. And when I first saw this, I was really confused. What does any of this have to do with the element of Geo? How did Zhongli do this? So, at first, it can be very deceptive because Morax's element Geo is yellow, which means it has a similar appearance to Pneuma Energy or the Imaginary Force. The power of order, Ether, Lumine, and the Primordial One possess. And the element of order entails the power to stabilize chaotic space, just like how the Imaginary Tree converts the Sea of Content into stable matter. Therefore, in addition to his dominion over the element of Geo, Zhongli also likely possesses control over the Imaginary Force, allowing him to expand his consciousness into domains and also manipulate and circumvent the power of the Abyss, which is what we likely see on display when he pulls Shao out of the chasm. So yes, I do think that Morax possesses some control over the Imaginary Force, the power to reshape and recreate the world around oneself. And going back to Zhongli's power manifesting as a cube, well, if we take a look at the only other god who manifests her power as a cube, do you notice the symbol? Does it remind you of anything? Exactly! And there is one more piece of evidence that I can add here, since we're on the topic of blue primal light being purified of its soul and turned golden. When we look at the leyline blossoms around Teyvat, there are only 2 types of outcrops. There are blossoms of revelation that give you experience materials and radiate a blue aura, and experience is quite literally memories, and then there are the golden blossoms of wealth. Mora is nothing besides metallic gold, meaning that it has no will of its own, just like Rene observed with golden Edelsight. And the god who created Mora is Morax, who branded it with the symbol of Tetraketra, which at this point can be safely assumed to be a symbol of unity and order for Celestia. And speaking of the golden Mora, besides Ether and Paimon, do you know who else are golden and silver like the sun and moon? Just to be clear, I'm not insinuating anything too crazy. If you look at Zhongli's design, you'll notice that he shares major design features with Ether, while Guizhong shares major design features with Lumine and Paimon, which is what leads me to believe that there are parallels between the characters of Zhongli and the Traveler, and at well over 6,000 years of age, Morax most likely has significant connections to Celestia and the foundations of Teyvat. When we talk to the memory of Marianne inside the Dream Realm, Mary states that a Traveler looks like a prince, a royalty from a land far, far away. This isn't the first time someone has made such a claim. The Genie Lilupar proclaims the Traveler to be a prince, which the latter does not dispute, and Zhongli himself says that one of the reasons he holds the Traveler in such high regards is because they are the perfect vessel for preserving the memory of Teyvat, since they are bound to cross the Celestial Atlas. Furthermore, something impressive about Morax is that when he first saved Elynas from the evil god that enslaved him during the Archon War, Morax gave him the name Shao, and told him that in a different world, that name was of a hero who overcame great adversities. And this is like Barbatos naming gods from the human mythology in his songs. What Zhongli did with Shao is him basically flexing directly that he has considerable knowledge regarding the worlds and civilizations outside of Teyvat. Alright, time to start wrapping things up. One of the major plot points driving the story of Fontaine is the nation's renowned waterline crisis, where the sea levels rise and flood the city, causing enormous financial damages to the people. It is this very water crisis that drives both Rene and Alain to become the people they turn to be. However, aside from just Fontaine, it seems that Teyvat in general has a problem with water. In one of her conversations with Zhongli, Alice states that the stone pillars in Jiren Karst look out of place, as if they belong at the bottom of the ocean, but the water surrounding them was drained out. A theory that Zhongli finds hilarious, laughing about it extensively. When asked, both Morax and Boer state that they despise the deep sea and mention how creatures of the deep are weird or disgusting. And those two in particular making such a statement is really interesting, because on one hand you have one of the oldest gods in Teyvat, and on the other hand you have the avatar of Irminsul herself. Furthermore, historically speaking, Morax fought, killed, and subdued so many sea gods, and one of his greatest rivals was Osiel, overlord of the Vortex. And you know what? Something that has been bothering me for a while now is a statement that Barbados makes towards the end of his Mondstadt Archon where he says that he is the weakest amongst the seven because he does not govern his people directly. This statement was misinterpreted by many and assumed to mean that gods get their power from the number of people that worship them. However, I highly doubt that is the case. Take Osiel, for example. By Zhongli's own admission, Osiel is one of the strongest gods in Teyvat. However, let us be real, no one worships Osiel. Like, who the hell will be praying to Osiel granting him power? The fucking fish? That being said, I do not think that the entire concept of worship has no merit either. While I doubt that the gods themselves receive their strength from prayers, the Archons probably still do, because that is precisely what I think the function of the Gnosis is. To convert dreams, memories, and ambitions of the people into primal light and realign it with the element best fitting the constitution of the wielder. We partially see this aforementioned process in action when Boer uses the electro-gnosis to summon an enormous amount of dendro energy and enter the realm of consciousness of her previous incarnation. And hopefully that reminds you of what I said about visions converting unaligned elemental energy into specific elemental energy. Remember how we see golden lights when we finally break from the samsara during Nilo's dance? Yeah, that should be another example of refining primal light into its golden form like Remus did with the primordial sea. And in Yae Miko's story quest, when we perform the Hakushin rite to quell the yokai spirits that manifest as, once again, blue primal light, the prayers and wishes of the people transcend into the heavens as golden energy, very much similar to the refined golden ichor of Remus, which I have been talking about this entire video. And here I need you to recall the story I told you about the Legend of Saha at the start of this video. You see, when we talked to Apap during Nahida's second story quest, she confirms a very crucial piece of information about Celestia. Apap says that the gods of Celestia are invaders. Now, this is a theory that I've had about Genshin Impact since 2021, and I've been waiting to share it ever since. What if the gods of Celestia are a race of super colonizers that invade, subdue, and take over worlds and then turn them into energy farms to fuel the war machines, just like the gods of Saha did with the wishes of their people, hence why Deshret chose to reject the gnosis of Celestia. Since visions represent someone's ambition, that would imply that the visions granted by Celestia to humans, their promises of divinity, are but tools through which Celestia can, well, harvest the ambitions of the people. After all, during the creation process of the Shoki no Kami, the Academia used the Akasha system sustained by the Dendronosis to harvest the dreams of the people of Sumeru and feed them to their newborn god. And that means that the cycle of destruction which Deshret and Remus both saw in their dreams and tried to prevent is just Celestia eradicating any civilization that knew or attempted to know the truth and defy their heavenly principles, defy their laws, defy their golden order. Here is something interesting that Zhongli says, which I never thought much of until now.
If the day ever came when he brought ruin to order, he would once again be sealed in the dark.
Once again, this could just be Zhongli saying that if Azhdaha tries to harm the people, he would get rid of him, nothing more, nothing less. But, okay, first of all, why would Morax even assume that Azhdaha would go rogue on humanity? What would Azhdaha gain from doing such a thing? Unless what happened to him was not just erosion, but rather him remembering who Celestia are. Also, I need you to take everything I have said so far into consideration and look at the specific choice of words that Morax uses. Bring ruin to order. Listen, I really hope I don't need to explain this further. Come on, guys. Celestia has two symbols, the triquetra and Solomon's knot, and both represent unity, eternity, and order. However, I'm sure you guys still have many questions. Like, for example, what about Cantolia saying that the Traveler is a monster that will destroy all life? How does this make sense? What about Rene de Petrichor? Didn't he also see the cycle of 7 that Deshret and Remus spoke of? But Rene didn't see eternity. He saw a future where the world ends and all life disappears. Not even mint or sweet flower would grow. So who is it going to be? The Abyss? Celestia? Well, if only there was a man out there insane enough to attempt to replicate Deshret's hive mind on himself. If only there was a man out there who has access to the soul-splitting techniques of the Remurians. If only there was a genius to rival the likes of Alain Guillotin and Rene de Petrichor. If only there was a single lonely man who is insane enough to challenge both heaven and hell and think that he can come out victorious in the end. If only there were... Ah, that's right. Of course. Zandik. When I first found out that Zandik had the rank of the second Fatui Harbinger, meaning that he's the fourth strongest individual in Snezhnaya, I was flabbergasted. After all, nothing about him seemed in particular special, and he did not appear to possess any significant power. However, after learning about the Remurian Empire and their methods of splitting souls, I realized just how insanely powerful Zandik could potentially be. During our initial encounter with him, Zandik showcases what is likely an advanced modified version of the hive mind process that we see with Siraj from Al-Haytham's story quest, or the Golden Slumber of Deshret, where Dottore can mind control people around him into doing and seeing what he wants without any reasonable mental effort from his side. Additionally, take a look at his earring. It has a blue fluid, very likely primordial waters, which throughout this video established as just liquid phase of primal light. There is an extremely high chance that, much like Rene used the Divine Blade to absorb the Narzissenkreuz Ordo into himself, Zandik modified the Remurian soul-splitting technique to copy his consciousness into various vessels, therefore achieving immortality and potentially bypassing Irminsul's memory-altering properties. That being said, the most dangerous thing that Zandik has in his arsenal is, well, his mind. At the end of the day, despite having practically no moral compass, Zandik is a genius. That much is undeniable. You see, in a world dominated by the vast, all-devouring maws of the Abyss on one side and the eternal divine order of Celestia on the other side, the Fatui appear awfully futile. They are just a group of mortal fools trying to challenge the unstoppable tides of destiny. And they even know that. They call themselves the Fools, and their leader is the Jester. Even if they manage to collect all the 7 Gnosis, what are they going to do with them? After all, they do not have enough people amongst their ranks who are capable of ascending to godhood, and the Tsaritsa cannot use all of the 7 Gnosis at once. Even if gods can use a Gnosis other than their own, they cannot utilize it to their full potential, and Zandik knows that. After all, he even explains it to Nahida during their negotiations, which means that the Gnosis in their possessions are practically useless. But that is the comedic irony of this circus known as Teyvat. In the end, Rene's prophecy of the future. A world where not even mint or sunflower will grow. It won't be the Abyss, it won't be the gods, it won't be the dragons of old. In the end, it will be these useless, foolish, insignificant clowns who will emerge victorious. The Fatui will win. When Zandik first met Piero 500 years ago, he promised him that he would create for him a god. Many people mistakenly think that he has already achieved that with Scaramouche and the Shuki no Kami. And that is absolutely not the case. When Nahida confronts him about not helping his fellow Harbinger in battle, Zandik replies by saying that he did not wish to interfere with the results of the experiment, meaning that the Shuki no Kami was merely part of an experimental process, a prototype to the true god that Zandik seeks to create. And I will go even further. I do not think that Scaramouche was the real subject of this experiment. Scaramouche was merely a controlled variable. During Winterlight's last Zoe, Piero tells Rosaline that her final resting place will be the entirety of the old world. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out that this means Piero wants to create a new world. Now, combine that with the Legend of Saha, where the gods of the world were once also humans, and then the end goal of the Fatui becomes awfully clear. What Zandik is trying to do is not just make a god. His final goal, Capitano's final goal, Piero's final goal, is to use the 7 gnosis to create a god that can control the imaginary force and then bind it to every living soul in the world to create a new supreme deity. A god that would rival the primordial one. A deity that would eradicate Teyvat itself and rid the world of all that which came before. That is the Tsaritsa's magnum opus. Her vision. A new world. One without the abyss. Without the heavenly principles. Without war. Without the 7 sage monks. Without fate. A world of harmony. A world of peace. A world of only love. And the gods of that new world will be none other than the fools themselves. And how fitting would it be for the Tsaritsa, who she herself is the god of love? Finally, one question remains. If Scaramouche with the Electro-Gnosis was just the prototype, then who could be the one that Zandiq will turn into his true god? Who is it that can control the 7 elements? Well, just like Canotella said, it will only take one bite. Honestly, this was by far the hardest and longest video I've ever made on this channel because it went through so many iterations across several production stages before I landed on this final one, which you just watched. And thank you all for watching this video. I appreciate it a lot, and I do not take your time for granted. To be honest, while making this video, I realized just how much effort and research the authors of Genshin Impact have put into their world building. I've had to cut countless different stories that didn't fit into the video about so many different topics from science, religion, mythology, philosophy, theater, classical arts, and so on, just because of how rich Genshin's inspiration is. And I guarantee you there is still a lot more to come in the future. But for now, all I have left to say is take care, and I'll see you in the next time.